They say imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, but in video games, it's not just flattery. Sometimes imitation leads to true originality and even improvements over the game that is being imitated. This was something that kept running through my mind as I completed Lies of P, a game that came out late 2023. Despite all the heavy hitters released at the end of that year, I kept hearing just about how good Lies of P was. And not to say that I wrote it off or anything, I was very excited for Lies of P. Having completed it now, I can say that I think Lies of P is one of the best Souls-like games released up to this point, hands down. And just because FromSoft did not develop it, it doesn't mean it isn't an incredible game in its own right. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Completionist, where we don't just beat the games, we complete them. And today, I completed Lies of P.
Yes! All glory goes to the winner!
An insult to say that something is derivative. I mean, a lot of the time, it is an insult. Movies and books and TV shows copy each other all the time, and video games absolutely do as well. It is easy to write off this phenomenon with the simple phrase of great artists steal. But honestly, in the case of Lies of P, it super works. Lies of P is a third-person action game where you meticulously explore deeply detailed environments to gather items, battle crazy-looking enemies, and work your way towards increasingly difficult bosses. And as you go along, you have to manage a health bar, a stamina meter, and limited resources to use special attacks. And if you're a real sicko, you can even parry enemies and go in for the kill. Sound familiar? Well, it's meant to. At first glance, Lies of P looks and feels a lot like the output of the acclaimed Japanese developer FromSoftware, right down to the user interface. The game even has a sort of gothic/Victorian aesthetic like Bloodborne. But as much as this game invites a lot of comparisons to FromSoft's catalog, as I completed it, I came to appreciate the game on its own terms in a way that really surprised me. Lies of P has enough of its own quirks and identity to stand out on its own, and it does so almost immediately. Players start off in a ruined train station, and the world is instantly evocative. Your character wakes up, and you realize you're right in the middle of something called the puppet frenzy. Sounds bad. Puppets are already scary enough, and frenzy definitely can't be good. After picking up your first weapons, you start exploring the mean streets of Krat to get to the bottom of what just happened, and naturally, to figure out what it means to be a real boy. Oh, did I forget to mention that the P in Lies of P stands for Pinocchio? Because it does. Yes, that Pinocchio. The one created by Geppetto where the nose grew too long every time a lie was told. On paper, the premise of this game sounds extremely ridiculous and kind of memeable. A dark, gritty reimagining of a popular kid's fairy tale. It's been done before, and not always with success. But after stepping out of the train and seeing the devastated, gloomy town of Krat, covered in the dead bodies of humans and horses, as a terrifying man-sized cop doll started bearing down on me, I was bought in on this extremely weird take on a classic story. It's way more of a Del Toro Pinocchio than a Disney Pinocchio, if you want a more modern reference. Dark, creepy, and more in line with the messed up original versions of fairy tales than the sanitized screen adaptations. So I completed Lies of P on the PlayStation 5. At 43 trophies, it's not a crazy trophy list to conquer. And honestly, this is one of the things I appreciated about its similarities to the Souls games. At this point in my life, having completed Demon's Souls, Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3, Bloodborne, Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice, and at this point, 99% of Elden Ring, I know that the achievements basically always stack up a certain way. Defeat all the major bosses, max out a weapon, finish multiple playthroughs to see every ending based on interactions you have with different NPCs. Pretty typical Souls game stuff here. As long as you're prepared and you keep track of a few factors over every playthrough, you will not be surprised by any hidden completion requirements. Earning the Platinum Trophy isn't very tricky. but there are a couple of secret items and upgrades locked behind New Game Plus and New Game Plus Plus. But rather than feeling exhausted at the prospect of playing through this game multiple times, I was very hyped. Because despite the clear design influence of FromSoft on developer NeoWiz, I genuinely enjoyed some of the choices made in this game more than the stuff that inspired it. When I say it's one of the best Souls-like, I mean that out of a sea of imitators, this one rises above its imitators, and in ways can stand side by side with actual FromSoft developed material. This game is more than just a knockoff. It has a real beating heart of its own. So I'm going to do my best to talk about Lies of P on its own merits, but some side-by-side comparisons will inevitably be made. I think it's valuable to see what this game does differently and how it interprets its influences to serve its own purposes. Whether you've already completed every FromSoft game and are eagerly awaiting the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC for Elden Ring, or have merely dipped your toe into the crucible that is the developer's library, it is pretty plain to see what FromSoft does well. Level design, character movement, and combat feel are all the big design pillars the studio leans on in every game. This might sound like a no-brainer, but it is pretty stunning to think about how well they nail these fundamentals in every one of their games. The reason I bring it up is because for the amount of games that use the term Souls-like as a buzzword in their marketing, I don't think very many actually hit those fundamentals in the same degree. Let's take the Star Wars Jedi games. Yes, hot take incoming. They're pretty goddamn cool overall. Running around and acting like a Jedi is undeniably awesome. But for as much as those games touted their Souls-like combat, I never really thought that they nailed it. I think the lightsaber play still feels kind of like a wet noodle against bigger enemies. But in Lies of P, they knew exactly what they were doing, with the combat system that nods towards Souls combat, but still carves out its own identity. There is a wide variety of weapons, and they all feel very distinct and weighty. You've got your standard swords and sabers, but after some exploration, you can carry around a fire dagger, a police baton, and even a gigantic 6-foot-tall wrench. 29 normal weapons and 11 special weapons in all. Every single one has an unbelievably satisfying heft to it that feels crunchy as hell. And on top of that, Lies of P lets you customize your weapons by breaking them apart and putting them back together. Weapons are made up of a handle and a blade, and snapping them together like they're pieces from a different Lego set feels super cool. You're juggling a bunch of different stats with the blades, but the main ones I focused on for each of my 3 playthroughs were motivity, technique, and advance. Essentially, strength, dexterity, and magic. Changing up handles basically lets you switch your fable arts, aka weapon skills. The amount of combinations and ways to express your preferred play style are pretty staggering here. This disassembling and remaking of weapons is one of the ways the game felt really fresh from playthrough to playthrough. For my first playthrough, I experimented with almost every strength-based weapon before landing on the giant wrench. Yes, it's literally called the Big Pipe Wrench, and it's awesome. I combined it with the fire axe handle and called it a day. How this little Timothy Chalamet looking player character can carry this thing around without any difficulty is anybody's guess. But I'm not complaining here. This weapon turned out to be a beast, and it even breaks through some enemy armor with no difficulty. Giant pipe don't care about no armor. Second playthrough on New Game Plus, I focused on building up my technique, mastering a weapon I acquired from beating the final boss of the game, Proof of Humanity. You can purchase this weapon using the final boss's ergo, essentially their soul. Yeah, it's not a gigantic wrench, but it's still a super sick weapon, which felt great to learn. The third and final playthrough, I did something completely different and went with an advanced skill set. Kind of like a magic build. I used a combo of fire daggers and an electric stun baton, and alternating between the two, I made my way through the entire game. And I still feel like I barely scratched the surface of mastering every weapon even after spending time with each one. There is a ton of depth to be had here. But a Souls-like must do more to stand out than just have unique weapons that feel good swing around. The developers of Lies of P absolutely knew that. The parry system in this game is when I really understood that these folks had their own very strong ideas. Every Souls game has its own take on the parry, right? In Dark Souls, you've got to deflect with a shield at just the right time. In Bloodborne, you've got to shoot a guy in the face to interrupt them in order to hit them with the visceral. In Lies of P, almost every attack is blockable and parryable. And if you hit enough perfect parries, you can even shatter an enemy's weapon. The first time I broke a weapon, I want to say when I was fighting a guy in a donkey mask on a bridge, I felt the possibilities of this game expand. Almost every boss or enemy has a weapon they can break if you're willing to put the time into mastering the parry. When I hit a perfect parry in Lies of P, it scratched an itch I didn't know I needed scratching. Staggering foes in this game can be a challenge, since the puppets move and jerk and spin around in extremely unsettling and hard to predict ways. But learning the patterns and executing what you want to do feels so good. You can always default to blocking and dodge rolling if you're having a hard time with the parry. The dodge roll feels pretty good, and blocking is a great option. You don't need to be the king or queen of parries to beat the game, but it definitely helps, especially on New Game Plus Plus. And it helps differentiate this game with its contemporaries even further. Outside of regular weapon combat and mastering blocks and parries, our boy has what's called the Legion arm, mapped to the left trigger. There are a total of 8 variations on the arm, and each one has a powerful attack that can be extremely useful. There's a super punch you get from the very beginning, or an electric blast. But once I found the puppet string, I fell in love. This was the only Legion arm I used for the rest of my playthroughs. This lets you basically pull a scorpion on weaker enemies, wrenching them towards you to smash them into pieces. And once you upgrade it to maximum level, you even get a little aerial attack. The puppet string rules in every respect. It's got a nice stagger bonus. More importantly, it has a great range in a game that doesn't give the player very many ranged options outside of some consumables that you can throw. You find it pretty early on, but to me, it became my go-to secondary weapon. Boss fights in general hit the right balance between frustrating and fun. There's still a little run back to get to a boss battle again. You don't get to restart in front of the fog gate or anything like that, but I never found this to be detrimental by any means. I also appreciate how if you lose against a boss, your ergo collects outside of the boss arena so you can collect it without fear. Does this make the game easier? Yes. Do I mind? Not at all. My favorite boss in the whole game is against Laxasia the Complete. It feels anime as hell, with lightning blasting everywhere as they're zipping around. Definitely one of those really chaotic battles that reminds the player to lock in, focus, and get the job done. The combat in Lies of P follows the template of a Souls game, but stands on its own 2 feet. Character movement and acceleration has the appropriate amount of weight, and the fact that the whole thing runs really smoothly on a technical level is fantastic, which leads me to my next point. This game is absolutely gorgeous to look at and explore, which makes the completion process that much more enjoyable. FromSoft level design is in a class of its own. I'm not saying Lies of P is on the same level, but honestly, it doesn't need to be. It does its own thing to tell its own unique story, and I think it's better that way. More importantly, there are quality of life and mechanical ideas baked into the design of Lies of P that make completing it incredibly satisfying. Right out the gate, you'll notice that Lies of P lacks the openness of some other Souls titles. But over the completion process, I didn't mind that at all. It's a pretty linear game, all things considered, but each location still feels densely packed and maze-like. Area design may not have that perfect looping feeling that the best Souls games do, but I never felt like a given area was poorly laid out or annoying to navigate. There are all kinds of hidden paths and secret items, even larger secret areas and hidden puzzles within dungeons. To me, and I know I'm not the only one that thinks this, sometimes dungeons and levels in Souls-like games remind me of a hardcore take on Zelda titles, and I get that vibe here for sure. I didn't mind that areas felt a bit more constrained. There's still plenty of content to enjoy without the game feeling annoyingly drawn out. It feels sharper, more pointed as a result. It also made the inevitable New Game Plus run feel less overwhelming since the game is a bit shorter and, if you'll pardon the pun, leads you by the nose a bit more. Some of the ideas in Lies of P are specifically designed to save you time and frustration. Souls-likes often have NPC side quests that are frustratingly vague, but Lies of P avoids that entirely. The chapter menu will actually show you when and where you can interact with an NPC to progress a story beat. Now, I love this. Instead of having to wander the entire world and talking to every character again and again to see if their state has changed at all, a quick glance at the map will tell you everything you need to know. It's an easy way to keep track of objectives without putting a massive glowing arrow on the floor or something like that. And one minor thing I came to appreciate as I completed this game was that it tells you how much ergo you need in order to level up. Rather than make a trip to Sophia at the Hotel Krat, you can clearly see if you have the currency you need to upgrade yourself at any time. I also like how this game handles the equivalent of flasks. In many Souls-likes, if you want to refill your healing items, you have to choose to go back to a safe location to re-up, and then fight your way through elements all over again. You can do that in Lies of P, but you can also earn back a charge of your healing abilities by landing enough hits and defeating enemies. So even if you use all your healing items against a boss, you're never truly out if you play well. This is a really smart feature that encourages you to keep exploring and keep fighting, even if you're starting to run low on health. There are also minor things that I like that the game just does well without drawing that much attention to them. You can summon allies in boss fights if you want a helping hand, but star fragments are super easy to farm, and the game doesn't punish you for using them. In my first playthrough, I didn't bother using summons at all, but I experimented with doing so in my other playthroughs, and I liked that it never felt like I was pulling teeth or spending an incredibly rare or precious resource. The summons do make certain fights easier, but the game balances this by giving bosses a larger pool of health. This game is broken up into 11 distinct chapters, making it pretty easy to figure out how far you are in the game. I appreciated the clarity provided to the player at every step of the adventure. I will say that since I didn't use summons in my first playthrough, that several items and collectibles I found were kind of rendered useless. Plenty of stuff that you find in the game feels pointless if you aren't engaging with that mechanic. You can't summon your friends at all since this is a single player game, so I get that the developers wanted to give the player options to buff or boost up their NPC allies. But part of me wishes that some of the rare items and resources I found were more useful to just me. I love the idea of the wish cube and wish stones, but I wish they benefited me more directly instead of my summoned allies. I had a similar problem with a couple of the P organ bonuses. There's a point in the game where you eventually rescue Geppetto, because of course you do. And then when you visit him, you can upgrade certain abilities by improving the P organ, which, now that I keep saying P organ out loud over and over again, it really needs a different name. I found myself skipping several upgrades or bonuses because they had no impact on my playthrough. There is one design choice that Lies of P takes directly from Souls game that I super do not agree with. You cannot pause the game. Yes, it's a single player experience. No, you can't really pause the action. It does the Souls things of pulling up the UI, but the gameplay still progresses in the background. So if you're not in a safe location, there's a good chance you'll be murdered if you try and check your inventory without being absolutely sure you're alone. This is one of those instances where copying a Souls game didn't actually help them out. As Lies of P goes on, and as I completed more and more of it, I found that it stands on its own more and more. Though I will say, I never fully bought into the story, even though after playing through the whole game 3 times. There's a robot revolution and some sort of sickness going around. It comes down to puppets versus alchemists at the end of the day. Who knows? This is definitely one of those cases where if you really want to understand what's happening to the fullest extent, then you're going to need to read every single item description and sign and talk to every single NPC multiple times and eventually go down the rabbit hole of lore videos to really get the meat of things here. I did like that there was kind of a cool homage to Monster the Whale in the form of a cool shark submarine. Though the game may not have a super deep main story, I appreciate the theming around everything. The constant question of what does it mean to be human? I felt like every side quest explored this idea to some degree by having Pinocchio choose to lie or tell the truth. One of the side quests that really struck with me was about a man who asks you to find his wife and bring back a wedding ring. But when you do, you find out she's a puppet. There's some back and forth about how strange it is for a human to love a puppet, but you can choose to tell the man that she had feelings for him too. I won't spoil the end of that quest line, but I thought it tied in quite nicely with all the ideas about humanity and how that reflects on all of us. Pinocchio is always seeking to become a real boy, and all the side quests reflect that. There's even a string of riddles to solve that center around this theme. Over the course of Lies of P, there are 5 riddles given to the player over the phone by a mysterious character called the King of Riddles. This guy is essentially the Riddler, only instead of kidnapping people and being punched by Batman, he torments you with riddles that are supposed to test your humanity and then gives you keys. It's a little silly, but I like how it ties back into the main ideas rattling around this game. And even if I didn't fully vibe with this main story, the world of Lies of P is very engrossing. I found the art design captivating. On NeoWiz's website, this game is described as a dark take on the Belle Epoque era, which I had to look up because I never heard that term before, and I could barely even say it correctly. But even just after a brief search, I'd say the art team nailed it. This game is exquisitely pretty. It's dark and messy and grimy, but it is also packed full of beautiful architecture that frequently had me stopping and staring. When I wasn't getting swarmed by nightmare puppet creatures, that is. The sound design drew me in too. You hear puppets clanking and monsters groaning, and the world feels alive and dangerous at all times. The creaking of these creatures in the background is very unnerving. You wouldn't think a bunch of humanoid robot looking constable guys could be that frightening, but you'd be wrong. The music is great all around. The boss themes slap, perfectly getting the player totally hyped up. I love that I could find records in the world and then play them as background music at the gorgeous Hotel Krat. It's a small detail, but this is one of my favorite collectibles in the game like this. It made me appreciate the soundtrack that much more. I did have a couple of small graphical issues. Things would occasionally load in awkwardly, and there would definitely have moments of pop-in or any other tiny little glitches. But nothing that was worth getting upset about over 3 playthroughs. Certainly nothing that made me not want to complete the game. Lies of P may not have the most complex trophy list or the most rewarding endgame, but to me, it is a game that rewards the player with great challenges and new play styles the deeper you go. There may not be an in-game percentage screen or a bonus art gallery or anything of that nature, but this game gives the player plenty of intrinsic rewards. When completing a game like this, it can feel very overwhelming and challenging, as each New Game Plus run ramps up in difficulty, and sometimes the rewards don't feel really worth it. But I felt like with Lies of P, they were. Simple as that. It took me about 51 hours total to earn all 3 endings. My first playthrough was obviously the longest and most careful, but every run after that went by faster and faster. Like any Souls game, systems that once seemed obtuse and hard to understand become second nature. And there are enough quality of life systems sprinkled throughout the experience that I never felt overwhelmed starting a new run. It is impossible to complete this game without New Game Plus runs in mind. There are 16 records to find and listen to in the game, but you can only find 10 in your first playthrough, and the other 6 are found via New Game Plus runs. And yes, there are multiple endings, and I had to complete one run where I lied at every possible opportunity to unlock a special secret weapon. There's a portrait of Pinocchio in Geppetto's office you find about halfway through the game that reflects your lying status. The more you lie, the more you'll notice that the nose in the painting is growing straight out. Eventually, if you lie enough, you can take the nose right off the painting and use it as a weapon. It's like a cool golden tree branch thing. But if you start a new run, it appears as a dull, lifeless branch because you don't have the same level of humanity. I wouldn't really call it a completion bonus, as it is only really effective at the end of one run before you start another, but it is cool that it's there. There are also some powerful amulets that you can only find during a New Game Plus or a New Game Plus run. These amulets spawn in chests in specific locations that you can only find on higher difficulties. You don't get any trophies or anything associated with finding these amulets, but I wouldn't consider it a true completion run without acquiring them, especially since I was already doing these additional playthroughs. In fact, there aren't really any true completion bonuses to the game. This is very much one of those games where the experience of clawing your way through several challenges and mastering your surroundings is rewarding on its own merits. Your first New Game Plus run, you can upgrade your character further. The highest P organ tier goes from 5 to 6. In a New Game Plus 2, it goes from 6 to 7. The difficulty does increase, but by the time you're done doing this run, I really think everything evens itself out. I was easily over level 200 by the end of my second New Game Plus run, ending at around level 230. The game really starts throwing extra levels at the player after a certain point. One thing I really liked about this game was that costumes are purely decorative. There are around 18 total, and there are no stats associated with them at all. You can just choose your favorite look and go nuts with it. I found myself rarely putting on any of the masks though. I like seeing his face. Outside of the Platinum Trophy, there isn't really any big completion rewards here waiting for the player at the end of Lies of P. But in this case, I don't consider that a negative. So, with that in mind, guys, I give this game my completionist rating of completed. If you've completed any other Souls game or Souls-like games like this, you'll have an idea of what to expect with this one. I still think it's a perfect example of what a studio can aspire to do when it takes direct inspiration from another amazing series. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, there is a playlist that has my other Souls completion videos, or you can check out my video on if you liked Bloodborne, then you might like these games as well. That's all for now. Hope you're all doing well. I miss you all very much, and I'll talk to you all soon.